and welcome to this week's Used Car Heaven. Another packed programme to come. Richard Hammond will be back with more tips and advice on buying a used car. Our car doctor Simon Hughes will be back in his surgery. And in part 2, we're driving 2 Rovers. But first, in part 1, 2 4-wheel drives, a Jeep Cherokee and a dinky Mitsubishi. So if you're wondering what's a dinky Mitsubishi, well, it's one of these. This is the recently introduced Mitsubishi Shogun Pinin, and it's the small, fashionable 4x4 that Mitsubishi introduced about 18 months ago. As you can see, there's not an awful lot of space in the back. It's got rather a funky interior. And if you're wondering where the name Pinin comes from, it was styled and designed by the famous Italian firm Pinin. So space, well, not fantastic. And as you can see, the boot space is not brilliant either. You can fold seats down to give you extra space, but it's really for 2 people and perhaps a small kid or something like that. Not too much space for all your luggage and shopping and bits and bobs. The Mitsubishi Shogun Pinin has not been around that long. It's been on the market for about 18 months, and supplies of used cars are gradually beginning to filter through onto the marketplace. Now, considering that this car was styled by Pininfarina, who've been responsible for some of the most beautiful cars in the world, namely the 550 Maranello and 360 Modena, you begin to wonder with this car what went wrong. There's no doubt that Mitsubishi makes some very, very good cars and some excellent off-roaders, most namely the Shogun, which has been around for a very long time. But if you feel that the Shogun is a bit too big and a bit too unwieldy for you, you want something a bit more compact and more nimble, then perhaps this Shogun Pinin might be the car for you. It sort of rivals cars like the Toyota RAV4 and the Suzuki Vitara, but has not really made its mark in the marketplace in this country yet. There are 3 different models in the Pinin range to look out for. There's the 1.8 GDI, which is this model. There's the GLX and the GLS, and each car gets that bit extra equipment. These cars are quite nippy, 1.8 engine, plenty of poke there, and they handle surprisingly well. When they're new, these cars range for anything from £14,000 to £17,000, but you could pick this car up, and it's only done 5,000 miles. You could pick this car up for just over £10,000. Mitsubishi Shoguns generally hold their value very well. However, this Pinin seems to be slipping back a little bit more than you would expect it to do. Considering it's lost over £4,000 since its new price is rather worrying. However, these things do handle quite well, and if you want to go off-road, well, having driven this car off-road, I can say that it does handle the rough stuff pretty well, which, considering some of its counterparts, do not.
Mitsubishi have a long history of building fine 4x4s, and the Pinin is a decent car, although serves more as a fashion item than as a serious family vehicle. £10,500 for the car we drove puts it up against an early Freelander.
Okay, so an explanation of the fine art of budgeting. This is your income. It's streaming into your household like that, okay? What you've got to do is, when that's gathered in your, this is your budgetary income for your house, you've got to, using this tape measure as time, okay? You've got your expenditures and you've got to, now look, this is easy enough really. You know what you've got to spend, work it out for yourself, and when you've done that, stick to it. That's your budget. What we've got to do now is work out the best way of maximising the efficiency of that spend. Get the most for your money. Now obviously, if you can just pay cash up front for your car, you're going to save money on the interest you'd pay if you financed it. But it is a myth that just by waving around a big wedge of wonga, you're going to get a huge discount, because the salespeople make a lot of their money on the commission they get from getting the finance. Mind you, if you do finance it, you'll probably save a lot of money on insurance, so maybe it's 50-50. And if you are going to finance it, you've got to decide how. There are 4 main ways of doing it. There's a straight loan from the bank or your mum. There's contract hire, there's hire purchase, and finally there's leasing. Let's take these one by one, shall we then? First of all, the loan. Well, that's obvious enough, isn't it, really? You stump up the initial deposit and you borrow the remainder to buy the car. You then pay it back with a bit of interest every month over an agreed term. The advantage of that is that you own the car right from day one. Mind you, if you don't make the payments, you might find the bank or your mum knocking on the door for their money back. Basically, it's a long-term rental agreement, as if you'd hired a car at an airport and kept it for 3 years. You make a regular monthly payment, and that pays for use of the car, but also for maintenance of it. Now, this is of particular interest if, say, you've come out of a company car ownership scheme and you've been given a monthly allowance, or maybe if you haven't got the deposit to put down to finance a car in any other way. There isn't one. You just make your monthly payments. The disadvantages, of course, is that, well, you never own the car. At the end of the term, you just hand it back and walk away, which isn't going to be any use in getting you onto the ownership ladder. In a few years' time, if you want to buy your own car, keep it, and not owe any money every month on it, you're going to have to start from scratch. And then it becomes slightly more complicated when we move into hire purchase. In fact, it works in a very similar way to a loan. So you make your deposit, you borrow the rest of the money to buy the car, you pay it back, bit of interest every month over a fixed term. But the big difference here is that you don't actually own the car until you pay the finance company the final payment. It's the finance company that own your car until the end of the term. One of the advantages, though, over other forms of finance is that with straight hire purchase, you're not going to be stung if you go over an agreed annual mileage. You can go as far as you like. Right, now it does get complicated with contract purchase, or PCP, personal contract purchase. These came about because people were having difficulty paying big monthly payments. It's a way of keeping your monthly payments low, and it works in the following way. The dealer makes a few assumptions. He assumes that firstly you're going to want to sell your car at the end of your term, say 3 years, and buy another. And then together you assume a minimum guaranteed future value for your car. In other words, you agree what it'll be worth in 3 years' time, say £4,000. That way, you don't have to pay back the £4,000 over the 3 years. It's saved until the very end. So you go along merrily each month, making your monthly payment, which will be lower. And at the end of the term, you've got a choice. You can either pay the £4,000 and keep your car. If it's worked well for you, the car might be worth a little bit more than £4,000, say £4,500, which means you can sell it. You can pay back the £4,000 you owe to the dealer, and you can take your 500 quid as your deposit on your next car. That way everybody's happy. You get a low monthly payment, your dealer gets regular monthly income, and he gets another sale at the end of the 3 years. But there are a few disadvantages. You want to be careful. For instance, some deals mean that they assume a very high value of the car in the future, say £7,000, whereas in reality it might only be worth £4,000. Then you're stuck because you owe £7,000 on a car that's only worth £4,000. The other problem you've got to watch out for and check is that over that term you may not be paying back the £4,000, but every month you will be paying interest on that deferred amount. So watch it, it's complicated, look into it and make sure you get a good deal, because the dealer's getting a lot out of this, a regular customer, regular monthly income and another sale at the end of the term. Whichever way you've chosen to finance your car, however tempting the offer and however pressing the salesperson is being in striking the deal, remember, take your time, read it through thoroughly. Don't be pressured into signing anything on the premises if you don't want to. Take the paperwork home with you and consider it carefully.
In America, Jeeps sell like hot cakes. Over here, they've had a pretty good run of it too since they were launched back in 1993. This is a 4-litre Cherokee. It's the smaller of the two Jeeps, and as you can see, it still gets a good deal of boot space. Plenty of space back there. One of the main criticisms of the Jeep, though, was getting in and out of the rear because of the footwell in there. And as you can see, it's a little bit tight here in the back, and it's just not very comfortable getting in and out of it. However, that has been rectified on the new Jeeps, which are about to be launched into the UK. If you wanted to buy this car when it was new, it would have set you back somewhere around £22,000, £23,000. But now, after 4 years, well, it's depreciated somewhat because you could buy this for about £9,500. I've always really liked the Jeep Cherokee, and it's been around quite a few years in the UK. Make sure that you go for a right-hand drive cars. Before they were first introduced in the UK officially, there were quite a few left-hand drive vehicles about, which may be cheap, but I don't think are worth the money, to be perfectly honest. You get selectable four-wheel drive. You can have it in just two-wheel drive for part of the time, or shift it to part-time four-wheel drive, full-time four-wheel drive, and then shift it to the low-ratio box as well for when you get on that real rough stuff. The Cherokees drive actually very well. There's not too much body roll going around corners, although the steering is a bit too light for my liking, to be honest. It tends to wander when you're going in a straight line and you're always having to correct it slightly. It's worth looking out for one or two of these special edition models from the Cherokee range. Things like the Stealth, which was in black and had lots of spoilers and blackened windows. Those are fairly rare cars to find. And also the Orvis, again, with a few extra bits and bobs which added to the price range, but now you can pick them up for quite reasonable money.
I've always liked the Jeeps ever since they were launched in the UK. Although they have a boxy, dated look both inside and out, there's something desirable about the Cherokee. The all-new Jeep Cherokee, out soon, will affect prices of these cars even more. So, haggle hard for a bargain.
I'm a big fan of Jeeps. I really like these Cherokees, and I reckon that this car for £9,500 is a bit of a bargain. But you don't have to pay as much as that to get a good Cherokee. £5,000 will get you a really nice early K-Reg example. That's all for part one of Used Car Heaven. In part two, we're driving some Rovers. Welcome back to part two of Used Car Heaven. Lots more to come, including more from our car doctor soon. But in this part of the programme, we're concentrating on two used Rovers. How about a Rover 600? 2 years old or so, yours for as little as £6,000. Or the more recent Rover 75. These are beginning to tumble back in price. £13,000 would buy you a nearly new example like this. If it's thrills and excitement that you're after, then the Rover 600 is probably not the car for you. It's one of those safe, reliable and slightly boring cars, to be honest, in the world. And they seem to have really hit their mark, these 600, with people who don't want to spend too much money on the car, but want something that's got a reasonable amount of space. And the Rover 600 fits the bill very well. Plenty of space for rear seat passengers. There's also back here a very, very handy parcel shelf back there for the sort of people who like to put a couple of cushions and a box of tissues on there. Absolutely ideal. And boot space, not bad either. I do think that the 600 is really beginning to show its age now. Remember that these cars were introduced back in 1993, so the earliest examples you'll find of these would be on a K or an L-Raj, and those cars are getting crazily cheap. £1,000, £1,500, £2,000 would get you a reasonable car. This car would cost £6,000. It's a T-plated car. It's done 16,000 miles, and this car, when it was new, would have cost £17,000. This 618 model actually drives very well. It's got a very slick 5-speed gearbox, good brakes. It's got a nippy 115 brake horsepower engine. You can have an automatic option as well if that's what you want. And there are lots of different models in the 600 range to choose from. 618, 620, there's a 620 Turbo, which is quite a rare car, and with 200 brake horsepower is also extremely quick and gets uprated suspension and other sporty features to it as well.
If you're after a good-size executive saloon for little cash, a Rover 600 really might fit the bill. Comfortable, roomy, and with a certain style to it, the 600 could never effectively take on German rivals, but these cars are getting seriously cheap.
Coming up soon, we'll be reviewing the Rover 75, but first, more from our car doctor.
Right, very often when you're going to buy a car, or if you see them driving down the road, you'll see that sometimes they smoke. And we've got good smoke and we've got bad smoke. White smoke you'll see early in the morning or on a foggy day, cars that have got like steam coming out. That's normally all right, but this car has got black smoke, as you can see. Right, that's lovely. That's not too bad either. That's a diesel, so it has got black smoke, and that's quite acceptable. If it's smoking too much, it's only adjustable, and it might even just be a blocked air filter. However, we've got blue smoke on this car, and you'll see that this is our enemy. So if you watch this as I rev it, that isn't good. And that's what I'm going to look at today and explain to you the different types of smoke, in particular blue, which is our enemy when you're buying a car, and you need to know what's good and what's bad. Now then, I've got a mock engine here, and I'm just going to talk you through very, very briefly a few components. In the cylinder block in this area, we've got pistons here that go up and down as I turn it round. Now, as they're turning up and down, we've got valves in our cylinder head that are also going up and down. Now then, we've got two possible causes of blue smoke. Apart from the obvious that we hope you would have checked to make sure that the engine isn't overfull with oil, if it is a cylinder block problem with pistons, you've got to walk away. It's going to be very, very expensive to fix. Because if it is that problem, then what we've got is a piston. It's got piston rings on here, and what it means is those piston rings are either worn or broken, and it's going to cost a lot of money to repair it. So we want to walk away from the car if it's got a cylinder block smoke problem. Now, on the other hand, if it's in the cylinder head, and I'm going to tell you how to define the difference between them shortly, but if it's in the cylinder head, I'm going to show you how simple it can be to repair. Now, I've got a cylinder head that's off the car here, and I'm going to remove one of the valves. So I'm going to use a valve spring compressor, which I'll pop on here. I'll only take a moment to pull apart, and use my little magnet to pull out one of the collets and then the other one. And we can see I can release this and I can show you what a valve is. So we pop that there. And that is a valve. Now that valve, as we've already seen, goes up and down there. But we get oil actually running down past the valve. So we have a valve seat, a valve seal just fitted here. And you can see it's only made of rubber, it's flexible, and because that fits over the valve, it goes up and down, that wears. And that valve stem oil seal is the cause of a smoking engine when it's to do with the cylinder head. Now that seal on its own is about 20 pence, and you can see we've got 8 valves, so you haven't got a lot of money there. But the labour involved in actually repairing this, if it's a major strip down with the cylinder head coming off, can be very prohibitive to you. So what I'm saying is that the cylinder block problems, if it's smoking, walk away. If it's a cylinder head, it is repairable, and in fact, even though this cylinder head's off, on a lot of modern cars, you can actually replace this seal quite cheaply without having to remove the cylinder head. Now, all you need to know now is, how can I tell the difference between it being a head problem and a block problem? Well, it's simple. If it smokes all the time, walk away, because it's definitely in the cylinder block. If it only smokes on startup, then it's a cylinder head problem and can be repaired, sometimes quite cheaply. That would be up to you to check with a specialist to see how much it is. So hopefully with that information, you'll be able to go and buy a car quite safely, or even diagnose somebody else's that could be faulty.
When the Rover 75 was designed about 2 years ago, it was described as the first all-new Rover for around 20 years. And in terms of that, what they meant was that it hadn't had any help from the likes of Honda. However, I suppose you could argue that BMW had something to do with it. It has got a very good size boot. Not bad in there. It's the ideal sort of golf club car. Looks good in the car park, and a couple of sets as well in there. Absolutely ideal. One thing to watch out for on the Rover, though, is things that go wrong. Make sure that all the electrics work in the car, the mirrors, the windows, the air conditioning. But already, on a car of this age, things are beginning to, well, sort of come apart. That's already broken. The rear brake light up there is gaffer taped on, so it doesn't kind of bode well for the future, to be honest. However, I absolutely love the interior of the car. It's very luxurious. Maybe the rear legroom is a little bit cramped, but I love all the Art Deco retro look and the dials. Absolutely fabulous. The remit for the Rover 75 was to come up with the best front-wheel drive car in the world, Whether the company actually succeeded in that is debatable, but they have come up with a very, very good car. Now this is an X-Reg car. It's not even a year old, it's done 15,000 miles, and this car would set you back £13,000. And again, when this was new, it would have cost way over 20 grand. There are 3 different trim levels in the 75 range. You have the Classic, which is this car. This is a Classic SE. Then there's the Club, and then the top of the range car is the Connoisseur. And each one gets a little extra trim. For instance, this car has got air conditioning, go to the Club, and you get climate control, go to the Connoisseur, and you'll get full leather upholstery, things like that. Nice extras as you go higher up the range. Engines, well, you've got the choice of a 1.8 4-cylinder engine, or this 2-litre V6, which is very smooth, or the even better and quicker and faster 2.5 V6. If you want a diesel, there's a very good 2-litre turbo diesel as well.
Now that the 75 has bedded in with the British public, it's a very popular sight on our roads. Whether the 75 quite makes the mark is open to debate though. Still, I reckon that as a used car buy, it's ideal.
So, 2 Rovers for you to choose from here on Used Car Heaven. A very cheap, nearly new 600 for around 6 grand, or a very nice Rover 75 for around £13,000, which is the better of the two, undoubtedly the Rover 75. But if you're thinking I can't quite stretch to £13,000 or even 12 or 11 grand, hang on a few months and watch the price of these cars drop even further. You may well pick a bargain next year. That's it for this Used Car Heaven. Join us again at the same time next week.